Now we're on the final part of our mouse tutorial, and the last things we need to do are add in a muzzle under the nose of our mouse and add his ears and finish his arms off. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take some leftover Gotland white wool that we've removed from other parts of the mouse's body as we've gone along in the tutorial, and I'm just going to tear off a small amount, so nothing too big. So this measures just over 4 inches by just over 1 inch in width, but it's very thin. And what we're going to do is very much like when we made the nose in the last video, we're going to be making another triangle shape. So I'm going to bring the top of the wool probably about 1 inch over, so we've got a flat top, and then I'm going to fold the corner over. So we're starting to create that triangular shape again. Then I'm going to bring it downwards. And there's no kind of hard and fast rules in relation to which way you turn it, as long as you're turning it over an area that you haven't turned it over on, if that makes sense. So sort of look for the sides that are a bit more frilly. So I'm going to keep turning that over on itself until I've got a relatively thick triangular shape like this one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check and make sure that that fits nicely under my nose, which it does. So now I'm just going to hold that in place, and I'm going to use my single twisted star to just felt that onto the mouse's muzzle area. And like we did with the nose, we're just going to take those corners and we're going to soften them by just pressing up with our needle into the corner and going around the peripheral of that triangular piece that we've just added in. So as you can see here, I'm just going to turn it so you can see, just felting that sideways very carefully. You don't want to felt it too much because you'll lose the shape. It's just enough to get a softer angle, and then going around the edges again. And then you can do some stabs in the middle too, but it's more around the edges that we want to get it nicely secured down, so it's sitting flush and you haven't got too much of an obvious gap between the triangular piece that we've just added and our mouse's face. Okay, so that looks good. So I'm going to take my second piece of wool and we're going to do the same thing again. And I'm just going to make sure it's roughly the same size as the first one we used. Folding over that top part of the wool first of all, the frilly edges. Fold it over to the right, then fold it down, and then I'm going to fold sideways towards the left, down, over to the downside, until we've got roughly the same size piece as we have on the side that we've just added. So fold it down again and then over to the side. That's looking pretty good. I'm just going to pull away all that excess because there's a bit more there than we actually need. And then I'm just going to hold that in place again, and we're just going to do the same thing. So the point is facing out on an angle. You've got the flat long side going against the nose, and then you've got the other flat side flush, kind of going along on an angle horizontally with the neck. So you can see from the video what I mean. So again, I'm just going round the edges of that piece, just felting it in, and I can tell already here that there's slightly more on the piece we've just added compared to the piece that we put on first of all. So what I'm going to need to do in a moment is just add a bit more wool to the other side to get that nice and even. So again, I'm just working around those edges to get them flush with the rest of the face, so there is an obvious gap. And I'm just getting a little bit more, not too much, just a bit more. I'm just going to place that over the first triangle that we added, just to get that the same size as the other one. And they should kind of meet. There should be a gap, but they can kind of meet in the middle. They're underneath the point of the nose. So yeah, you're going in relatively firmly and deeply. Getting it nicely felted in. So the next step with creating our muzzle is we're going to take some more Gotland white wool, and we're going to take thin amounts, and we're going to layer this over the top of our mouse's muzzle. So what I'm doing, I'm just pulling the wool with the way that the fibres are flowing, and then layering it on top of each other. So I've got probably 3 layers on top of each other here, nothing too thick. And then I'm just using my fine twisted needles. I'm going to go straight down the middle first of all. Tack that down in place, and then around the nose and those edges where we want to have more of a defined edge. So once those are in place, we could also have some going over the top of the nose, and it just kind of softens that pink that we have on the nose. But you don't have to do that. You can also just kind of move the wool and just felt that into the side so you can't see it. So what I'm doing now is making sure that my wool's nice and straight, and I'm just felting it lightly over the muzzle that we've added and over the rest of his face as well. You don't want to go too heavy-handed with this, just nice light bouncing motions, and making sure that you don't end up with any gathering of the wool. Keep it nice and as flat as possible so it's laying nice and flush with the rest of the face. So just going around the sides there. And this is a gradual process. You don't want to go in with loads of wool too quickly. It's better to do it gradually, and then you can see exactly how much you're going to need, rather than using a thick amount straight off and then finding actually I've used too much. So it's better to do it in a couple of goes. So I'm just felting under the neck, and then again around on the muzzle, again trying to get that nice and flush, and any gaps that we have, just getting rid of those. And then again working from the inside out, and that just helps to dissipate any air pockets that we might have and get that felt nice and tight. So I've got a bit of a gap there, so I'm just going to concentrate on getting rid of that. And then just going around the eyes again. I've got a bit of cheeky wool that's crept over, so I'm just using my needles to just brush that away, and then just felt that down back into the white again. And that quite commonly happens if you're adding additional wool on top of something and then you've got an area that you don't want that wool to sit. That quite often happens that you have to kind of brush the excess wool out the way and felt it into the face or whatever you're making. So that's the first layer. So we're going to go for a second layer now. So again, I'm going to take some more Gotland white wool. Not a very thick amount, quite thin. You can see my fingers through it. So you want it to be relatively opaque. I'm just pulling it apart very gently, and I'm just laying it on top of each other. We don't want a huge piece, just enough to cover that muzzle and sort of a little bit of the cheek area. And I'm holding it in place again with my thumb and forefinger. And I'm using my needles, initially one over the top, just to get that mouth in. And then again, making sure that my wool's nice and flush and felting it very gradually and lightly into place. Going under the arms as well if you've got any excess wool that's kind of around the underarm area. Making sure I've got those edges in around the nose and the mouth, so he's got that definition still. And then working from the inside out in that bouncing rhythm, not too deeply with the needles, just to get that felted into the face. As you can see, I've got a nice bit of wool just going over the pink of the nose at the bottom, and it just helps to integrate everything in with each other. and gives more of a natural look as opposed to having just a solid pink solid pink nose. That kind of white just helps to kind of blend it in a bit more with the rest of the face. And I'm just going around checking for looseness to make sure all that white's nicely felted in. And I'm kind of feeling with my fingers as well, feeling to make sure that it's feeling a bit more flush with the rest of the face as opposed to an obvious bulge. Because you want it to kind of angle so that you've got the kind of the little lump at the front by the nose, and then it kind of sort of dissipates on an angle in with the rest of the face. So he's starting to look pretty cool. Just giving his nose a bit more of a felt. And again, I'm always kind of checking and squeezing as well, just in case the face starts to misshape a bit. Just constantly checking, making sure everything's symmetrical. And then just going in around the eye sockets again. And the shaping of the face, it can take quite a lot of time because we're doing it very gradually, and obviously, like I said, wool can bounce back up again. We want to take our time with it, and also very small things that you can do can make all the difference in terms of what a face looks like. Kind of little kind of lines or indentations can really transform the look of a face. So I'm just going back around the eyes now, but where I've put that new wool in, it's kind of moved over the eyes a little bit. So I'm just tidying the eyes up, getting those lines back in there that we added earlier on. Just going back over the eyebrows as well, getting them a bit more deeply set. He's looking good. So now we're going to be adding his mouth. And I do lots of different mouths, but we're going to just do a simple smiling mouth for this mouse. So I'm taking a small amount of brown New Zealand merino wool again. And this time my piece is a little bit thicker than we used for the eyes, but it measures about just over 4 inches in length. We won't need all this, and it's about 5 millimeters thick. So it doesn't need to be overly big. We don't want it to be too thick, but we don't want it to be too thin either. And what I'm doing now is I'm just twisting it between my fingers to get it nice and straight. And then I'm taking a slightly, you don't want to use the kind of the wispy end. Let that go past the nose upwards, and we're just going to take the thicker bit. I'm going to hold it in place down that line we've made with the muzzle, and using my medium needle, I'm going to hold this nice and taut, because if you don't hold it taut, as you felt, all the wool will start to gather upwards. So I'm just going to felt that down into that muzzle and get it nice and firmly felted in. And what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to split the wool that we felted into that initial divot. We're going to split that in half. But I'm just going to take that piece of frilly edge that we had. I'm just going to fold that over and felt that in as well. Just using my medium twisted star again. And I'm going to get that nice and smooth. So they're all running in the same direction, all those fibres, and I'm going to split it evenly, like so. And now you can see where our mouth is going to sit. So that's looking pretty cool. You don't want mouths to be too wide generally. I would say that his mouth could probably be about 1.5 centimetres each way, and that would be enough, or even a little bit shorter. But you don't want it to be too wide because it can make your characters look, well, depending on what it is, but on the mouse it can look quite unnatural. So I'm just holding that wool again taut with my fingers so it can't move anywhere as I felt it, and I'm just carefully with my medium needle just felting that into the face. And take your time with this. Again, just do little bouncing stabs holding the wall nice and taut so it can't go anywhere. And then the same with the other side, get it into the same position as the other piece. And then we're just going to felt that into place. Getting it nice and taut. And get it felted in. And as the more you felt it, obviously the more it sort of disappears into the face and it looks more like it's part of the mouse's head as opposed to being kind of like an obvious brown line that could be kind of drawn on or something. Just kind of, as we felt it deeper, it becomes a bit more natural looking. So I'm just going in with my needle now and getting that mouth a bit more deeply set into the face under the muzzle that we added. And this can take a little bit of time because we want to, again, do it gradually, but we want it to get to look neat. And you might find, you can probably see that there's a few areas that aren't that neat. It's a bit kind of rough, so I might go over that again in a little bit with some more wool just to get it looking a bit neater. But the position of the mouth I'm happy with. So now I'm happy with that position, I'm going to take my embroidery scissors and I'm just going to snip the ends off. Okay, so there we go. So he's looking very mouse-like now. I'm just going to felt those corners in, tuck them away. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start creating a smile. So I'm going to take my medium needle again and we're going to really felt the corners of the mouse's mouth. So we're creating little dents either side of his mouth. And that's going to give that look that his face is being lifted upwards with the smile. And it's going to make him look quite realistic. So I'm just going to turn him upside down so you can see. And we're going to felt downwards. And you can be quite brutal here. Really use your needle quite heavily to get that indentation really felted in. And it's a fine balance when you do this. You want to kind of do it enough so that you can see the difference and he looks like he's smiling and his kind of face is being lifted. But you don't want to go too far the other way and do it too much because then it can look quite unnatural. So it's just, I'm just using the end of a needle here and pushing that in to get that indentation a bit more deeply set, and then I'm using my medium star needle, twisted star, to then do the indentations. The needle I just used to push that wool in, that was just an embroidery dull needle, so not a needle felting needle, but they're quite a lot thicker than a normal sewing needle, so they're quite good for creating smaller indentations in things. So I'm just going over the other side and then I'm just checking, and you can see straight away it's giving his mouth a bit of a lift. So I'm just going to go down a bit more, and I can tell you now that I'm going to need a bit more brown wool on that side. Just where I've been felting, some of that brown wool's disappeared where it was a bit thinner. So I'm going to get a little bit more merino brown in a minute, some of that roving, and just add that in just to kind of make that mouth look even. So you just need a pinch, you don't need loads. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a little bit more than I do need so that I can just trim away the excess rather than trying to use the exact amount and it gets a bit fiddly because it's such a small piece that I need. There we go. So I'm just going to trim that away. There we go. And then I'm just going to felt that down again into place. And still working on that little dent that we're making at the corner of his mouth. Those little dents are a really nice little technique, and they really do add a lot of character to anything you're making. It works with most most sort of, especially animal sculptures, it works really well, but it can work with more human-like sculptures like fairies and things too. It just adds another dimension. So all I'm doing now is I'm just going back over my mouse. I'm just tidying up any edges, making sure that he's looking nice and neat, ensuring that everything's looking symmetrical, and all my little indentations that I added earlier on, they're still showing through, to get as much of a characterful face as possible. I'm just going down the sides of the head again, so when we add his ears on, it's going to give some nice dimension as well by having that side of the head angled. I'm just giving him a general tidy up with my fine needles, focusing a bit more, felting around the nose area, getting that looking a bit more deep. So we don't want a flat looking face, because when it's flat it just doesn't have any, there's no character there at all. So we want to have those kind of, those shapes. I'm just working around the neck again, getting that nice and defined. And just round the back of his head, getting more definition around there as well. So there's more of a clear, defined shape between the body and the head. I'm just going around the back of the shoulders here now, just tidying everything up around the arms. We're going to be adding some more wool to the arms in a moment, so I'm just making sure that any looseness is tucked away, which I've already added. And just going round again, round the body, making sure he can stand, which is very important. The tail acts as a great balancer for the mice. So we've completed pretty much most of the face now, apart from the ears. So our next task is to tidy up his arms and get them looking more integrated with the rest of the body. So I'm taking 2 slim slithers, it's a bit of a mouthful, slim slithers of white Gotland wool, and I'm just making sure that they look roughly the same length and width. They measure about 8 inches, 7 inches, 8 to 7 inches in length. And I'm going to take a slim piece of wool, and then on the mouse, I'm just going to turn him, and I'm going to take about 1 inch and I'm going to fold it so it's hanging over his shoulder towards his head. And then the rest of it, the length of it's going to be behind him. And then I'm going to take my fine needles and I'm just going to felt that down over that shoulder. And I'm going to felt it quite close under the arm and over the arm. So sort of felting down onto the wire as well and underneath to get that nicely felted in. And now it's anchored, I'm now going to take that piece and I'm going to fold it over our arm. And I'm going to go down to the hand. And then I'm going to work my way back up again, but just do it very carefully and make sure that you're keeping your wool nice and taut and nice and straight, so it's not twisting and creating any gathering or ruching. As you work your way back up, you just want to take that last frilly bit, hold it over the shoulder so the ends of your fibre are behind the mouse, and then just tack that into place. And it should stay in place quite easily. It shouldn't unravel because you've anchored it down and you've kind of wrapped it very tightly. So I'm just felting those bits of loose fibre around the back of the mouse and making sure it's not going anywhere. Any looseness is felted down. And just go over, you could go over the armature itself a little bit, but you don't need to go too crazy. I'm just lifting his arm up. As you can see, I've got a little pocket there that's forming where it's not been felted down. So I'm just going to felt into that as well and get rid of that gap. So that's looking good. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add another piece of white Gotland, and I'm going to wrap it again for a second time. So we're creating more of a thicker arm and a bit more of a shoulder, because his shoulder's a bit too thin still. So I'm going to take that second piece of wool, I'm just going to split it because I don't need as much this time. I'm going to focus more on the shoulder side of things rather than the entire arm. So exactly the same as what we did a moment ago, just leaving about an inch over the chest and felting that down nice and flush, going under the arm. So we're anchoring it into position. And once that's secured, again, I'm just going to fold it under, and I'm not going to go down all the way this time. I'm just going to concentrate folding around that shoulder area, because everybody's shoulders obviously look, you know, they're a bit bigger than the rest of their arm, sort of their lower arm. So we're just concentrating on that upper arm area and that shoulder area and making it look a little bit bigger so it's more in proportion with everything else. And I'm just felting that down again in place, going over the armature of the arm and getting that nicely tacked in so it doesn't unravel anywhere. Just going under that arm again as well. And you can see that there's a difference now between the two arms, and the arm we've just rewrapped just looks a little bit more natural and neater. So we're going to do exactly the same thing again, but this time we're going to do it with the other arm. So again, I'm going to take my wool, and I'm just speeding things up for you now that you've seen how you do it. But this time we're going to go in reverse. So I'm going to hold, and this is just because I'm right-handed. It doesn't really matter which way you do it, but the inch is going to go around the back of the mouse, and then the length is going to be around the front of the mouse this time. So securing it in place again with my fine needles, and then I'm just wrapping it down, keeping it nice and straight, going slightly over that hand again, and then back up to the shoulder area, getting it nice and even. So just felting that excess around the front of the mouse's chest this time, and then under his arm, getting rid of that little pocket that will be forming where we've added additional wool. Just going over his back a bit as well while I'm here, just getting that a bit neater. You'll always find that you'll start doing something with needle felting, and then you'll see something else and think, I need to sort that out as well. And it's quite easy to get sidetracked on other tasks. So I'm just getting that nice and neat. And then I'm just going to add that second piece of wool, which I'm going to focus around the shoulder and upper arm. So same thing again as we did a moment ago. And then tacking it in with my fine needles, and then folding it over, concentrating on the upper arm. So you're going down by about 1.5 centimeters. You're not going down any more than that. And then just again felting it into the neck and hiding that extra piece of fibre. And I'm just going over the rest of the body, getting it all nicely tucked in. And I think we're ready for his ears. Now, to make our mouse's ears, we are going to take some small sections of the Gotland white wool bats. So nothing too huge, just a couple of sections. I've got a couple of layers there at the moment, but I may need to make those a bit smaller in a minute. So I'm just tearing off 2 pieces and laying them on top of each other. I'm just going to measure those and see how big they are. So they're about 3.5 inches by about 2.5 inches. So I want them to be a bit smaller than that. So I'm just going to tear the bottoms off, going in the direction of the fibres as I pull. not pulling too tightly. Just hold them loosely, pull gently, and then just layer that on top. So I've got 3 layers there. So I'm going to start off with my first piece, and using my 7 needle puncture multi-tool, I'm just going to stab into my felting mat, my brush mat, and I'm felting it in a circular motion. So I'm stabbing into the mat and working my way around in a circular stabbing motion until I've got about an inch left around the edges. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold those kind of loose fibre sides over and felt them into what I've already felted, so into the sort of centre of the piece. So gently folding them over and then securing them down. And I'm just going to keep doing that, but I'm not going to completely felt it all the way round. I'm going to leave some fibres at the end. We're creating like an incomplete teardrop shape, if you like. So we want to have those frilly fibres at the bottom so that we've got something to tack down onto our mouse's head. So I'm just felting that down, and then what I'm going to do is just pull it away from the brush mat. I'm just going to pull it out, tease it out a little bit because the fibres are quite malleable once they've been felted down. And then I'm just going to felt that on the other side with the needles, just to get it nice and secure and a nice firm felt on it. Just going around the edges, and then I'm just looking, and if I've got some frilly edges, I'm just tucking them in and then felting them down again, but ensuring that we leave that sort of 1.5 inch of fibre, loose fibre at the bottom, so we've got something to attach to our mouse's head. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to move on to the next ear, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. So felting in a circular motion. So if I show you sideways, you can see what I'm doing. So getting that circular shape as close as possible to the one we've just made. So I've got about 1 inch of fibre around the edge again, and then I'm just folding those loose fibres inward and then felting them down with the multi-tool. And then just very, very gently pulling them over. But you want quite a firm felt on this because we want it to be nicely compacted together. So I'm felting that on an angle again to get that teardrop look that we're going for. And then I've got some looseness around the edges where I've folded those over. So I'm just using my tool to felt that down. I'm just going to compare sizes. They look pretty good. They're pretty similar. So I'm just giving that one a bit of a pull as well to get it as close as possible to the ear I've just made. And then I'm just going to turn that one over and give that a good felt on the other side. I'm just going to get some of those edges. It doesn't really matter if you do have rough edges. You can leave those rough edges because, you know, it's nice to have that bit of fluffiness to a mouse. So don't feel that it needs to be perfect. You can leave a bit of fibre kind of hanging out. So now we've got our ears. They measure 3 inches down to the bottom of where the fibres are loose, and then they're about 2 inches wide. So that's the kind of sort of size you're aiming for, but if they're a bit smaller or a bit bigger, it doesn't really matter. So now we've made the general shape of our ears, we're going to take some more of our pink New Zealand wool bats. I'm just taking a very small pinch, and we're just going to layer that in the middle of our ear. And you want it to be kind of half the size of the diameter of the ear we've just made. And then I'm just going to stab that in place again with my multi-tool. And give it a good stab so it's all nicely secured onto the ear. And you'll find, like I said in the past, that once you've left this overnight, all those holes that are created by the multi-tool they'll disappear as the wool relaxes again. So now we've got our ears, we're going to secure them onto our mouse. And the first thing that we need to think about when we're putting our ears onto our mouse is where on the head we're going to position them. So fold the loose ends and pinch them together. So you've got about 1 inch of loose ends, and then you've got that teardrop shape, which is kind of concaved. And then you just want to hold it in place on the head of your mouse and decide where the ear looks best or where you want it to go. So I think it looks pretty good here. So I'm going to hold that into place and I'm going to push him really firmly onto my brush mat so he's nice and stable and he's not going to go anywhere. Not my brush mat, sorry, my felting mat. And as I hold the ear in place with my thumb and my forefinger, I'm just going to felt those loose fibres at the end down into the back of the head with my fine twisted needles. And just be careful of your fingers. Again, you could use your finger gloves for this. So now the back's been felted into place, I'm going to felt down the sides of where I've pinched. So where my thumb and my forefinger were holding onto the wool, I'm just going to felt that down because we want to keep that shape so that the ear goes inward as you look at the mouse. And then I'm just going to take my needles and I'm going to felt inside the ear on those edges and get them felted down nice and firmly. And you can kind of use your needles to kind of bend the ear round to create more of a circular ear shape. So you can see I'm using my needles side by side there. And then I'm just bringing that wool round the base of the ear and sort of tucking it inward so it's creating more of a circle shape. So just checking that and just bringing that wool around again. Just move it so you can see what I'm doing. So side by side and then just bringing that round. Unfortunately, the camera wants to focus on my hand and not on the wool. And then I'm just going to felt inside again, get that nice and firmly tacked in. So there you've got your first ear in place. I'm just going to go around the back again, make sure it's nice and secure. But it's looking nice and neat. You don't want too much excess fibre at the bottom because you'll have a bit of a lump. So it's a balance. So about 1 inch is about enough. You don't want any more than that really, 1.5 inches maybe. So same thing with the second ear. So I'm just going to pinch it at the bottom. I've got a bit less fibre this time, so I've got a bit less to work with. So I just need to be careful of my fingers that I don't stab myself. So I'm just getting that into place off camera. So that looks about right to me. It looks about the same as the other ear. So same thing, I'm just going to push him really firmly into my mat and hold that ear in place with my thumb and my forefinger. And I'm just going to spread those fibres so they're nice and even against the back of his head and then felt them in with my fine twisted needles. And then just always being careful of your fingers. And then once you've got the back of it felted down, same again, just go down the sides of where you've been pinching. So you've still got the pinch in there, but just felting down the sides, either side of that pinch. And then down that side as well. It's a bit trickier with this one because I've given myself a little bit less wool to play with on the bottom to felt it in. So I'm just going around the sides again. And then with the second ear, because it's quite easy for the ear to move out of position as you're felting it in, just double check and make sure that it looks about the same as your other ear. So I think that's looking pretty good. So I'm just going to go down the middle of that one again, felt that through the middle of the ear. So it's nicely secured. And then just check it again. I'm just using my needles there to pull it round and then felt that down. So, and you might need to manipulate them a bit, give them a bit of a pull. Just felting around the back again, pushing that upwards. And what you could do, if you have any unevenness on the back of the head where you've attached the ears and any kind of gathering of wool, you could always take a thin piece of Gotland white and just layer that on the back of the head and felt that down with your fine needles, just to give it a neater finish. So I'm just giving it a bit of a tug, just to move it a bit more into the position that I want it to be in, and then just felting it down again. And sometimes you might find that it's not in the right position, and so you just need to pull the ear off, and they usually come away with a bit of force. They come away sort of without causing any damage to the rest of the mouse, and then you can usually reposition them and secure them again. So don't worry if you need to reposition an ear. It's generally not too much of an issue. I think perfection was on my mind on the day that I made this, because it looks pretty good. They look pretty even. So I'm just going to go down the sides of the head again, and this is just creating more of that angle that I've been talking about throughout the tutorial, to get a bit more of that characterful face that we're looking for. A bit more stabbing the ear into place. But I think he's looking very nearly finished. And you can go over your mouse with the fine needles, and if you've got any areas where it's a bit fuzzy and you want to just neaten it up, just go over your mouse now and just do that. But I'm just going to go around his neck and head area again, just underneath, just to get a bit more definition. He's looking pretty good now. I'm just checking that I can move his head nice and easily and reposition him. That looks good to me. His little arm up to wave. So he is finished. So congratulations, you have just finished your first ever needle felted mouse with an armature. So he's posable with his head and his arms and his tail. So you should be really chuffed with what you've just achieved. You've made your first ever needle felted mouse with an armature. Now let's move on to some more exciting tutorials.